Hi, so today is June 15th, 2020, and I'm interviewing my friend Jim McRitchie. Hey, Jim,
Hey, Mike, good to see you.
good to see you. Hey, so how old are you now?
72.
Okay, so we're going to take a little journey from,
Whoops.
from your childhood to where you are now. So let's start with, you're Canadian, right?
Well, my parents were Canadian, so that came in handy during Vietnam. So I became Canadian then. Although I was always kind of thought of myself as a dual citizen.
So where did you grow up then?
Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh mostly.
In Pittsburgh. And how far back did your family come to the United States? What?
My parents were set here before World War II started for the States. The Canadians, of course, were fighting with the British, not with the British, but alongside the British. And so they sent my father, and of course, they were buying a lot of weapons from the United States. So they sent my father to the States to inspect airplanes.
Huh. So what did your dad do?
He inspected, well, during the war, he was an engineer. He was a ceramic engineer, which doesn't have a whole lot to do with inspecting airplanes, but that's what he did. I think he was in the Royal Canadian Air Force or something for 2 days or something, and then they sent him to the United States to inspect airplanes instead. So,
And what about your mom? What did she do?
well, my mom had to drop out of school to, I think she dropped out in the ninth grade to help put her brother through medical school. So that's the way things were back then. And well, she liked art, so she was an artist, basically, an artist and a homemaker.
So she dropped out of school in ninth grade. Do you know what kind of job she had?
She had a job as a secretary or some sort of clerk.
In ninth grade. And this was in Canada then.
Yeah, yeah, she was in Saskatoon. Well, yeah, Saskatoon.
Okay. And then how old were you when you moved to Pittsburgh? And what are some of your memories of
Pittsburgh. We moved there when I was 6 from Columbus, Ohio. And my father had picked the community we lived in because they they did have very good school system. But that school system wasn't so good for me because I was more of a rebel than what the school system was basically designed to bring up little fascists or at least little capitalists or whatever. And so, like on my paper route, I had 3 vice presidents of U.S. Steel, all kinds of, Gulf Oil, Alcoa. So, so it was a very, the community was, almost everyone went to college. There was no Black students in my school other than we had a Black student from Uganda as an exchange student. And we had one Chinese student whose parents ran a laundry in town. So it was basically, and I remember, well, he was Cassius Clay back then, but later Muhammad Ali, he tried to buy a house in town and he was willing to pay twice as much as the asking price and they wouldn't sell it to him.
Whoa.
So,
why were you a rebel? What makes you say that?
well, I remember in 3rd grade, I refused to read the Bible. So back then you had to read the Bible in opening ceremonies in the class. And I said, well, I'm a Buddhist, so I don't want to read the Bible. And then the next year I refused to salute the flag, saying I was Canadian. And then later on, there were things like, I remember in junior high, I had to memorize all the valence numbers on the periodic table. And I went home and I asked my father, who worked with chemistry every day, all day, I asked him, what's the valence number for lithium or whatever? And he said, well, just a minute. And he looked up on the periodic table. And I said, well, don't you know those by heart? And he says, no, they're right here on the table. So I basically went back to my chemistry teacher and said, I'm not learning this stuff. And he says, well, you're going to flunk the class. And I said, I don't care. So, and another one was I flunked the class because I refused to draw. Basically, part of the assignment was to draw all the diagrams in the book, to trace them on paper. I said, I have better things to do with my time than to trace. That's what books are for. The book has the drawing in it. I am not going to spend my time. So I flunked several classes that kind of way. And my grades, I think when I left, I'm very fortunate that we left. So I had my final year in a different school in New Jersey. But I think my grade point average at that school was somewhere well below a C average. So.
And your parents, they encouraged you to be, they're okay with what you were doing?
Yeah. Well, they weren't real happy about me, practically flunking out, but they certainly supported my, efforts to. My father was very active in the peace movement, and we subscribed to all the radical magazines, and so they were fairly supportive of me, as well as long as it seemed like I was learning at least what I wanted to learn. So, and I think I learned quite a bit in school, but I didn't learn the things that the school wanted me to learn.
And was your family really Buddhist?
No, they weren't Buddhist. I just thought, this is, why should we have to read the Bible? There are people in the world who, this would not suit. And so I'm going to basically pretend to be one. And, they called my parents up and they made a big deal out of it. But my parents were very supportive and said, oh, well, he's been studying Buddhism lately. So, if he wants to think he's a Buddhist, then that's fine. My father was a searcher. He went to lots of different denominations of churches and whatever. So encourage that.
Did you have friends then who were like you?
I had friends who were outcasts. So I guess that's about as close as we had a, I think it was fairly soon after we had a really good high school football team. And we played an all-black school. I remember Westinghouse. And I remember the captain of the Westinghouse team got shot. And I don't know if he died or I don't know, but it caused something of a riot in the stadium. And soon after that, we held a Kick a Gypsy campaign in school. So we put up signs all around campus saying, gypsies are too carefree, kick a gypsy today. Anyway, we had all these various campaigns. And, of course, we were the gypsies in our minds. It was kind of like a way to try to awaken people to other people. And, we need to care about other people and treat other people with respect and whatever. But, of course, the principal and vice principal, I didn't quite see it that way. So, but.
What about siblings? Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have two brothers, and one went to Canada. Well, he was born in Canada, and he went to Canada during the Vietnam War and stayed there. And the other brother, I guess he was too old for the war, so he was kind of between Korea and Vietnam. I don't think he would have served either. I mean, basically, my father, with all the magazines and everything we got, I mean, I could see, okay, we were going to war in Vietnam to break a treaty that the French had made with the Vietnamese to prevent the Vietnamese from holding an election. So why would I go to fight people to stop an election? And actually, when I went to my draft board and tried to get a conscientious objector status, I remember talking to them, trying to talk to them about Buddha and other, and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and whatever. But I remember talking to them about Canada, and I remember one member of the draft board said, "Well, that's in upstate New York, isn't it?" So that kind of told me, what kind of people I was dealing with at the draft board. So I decided, okay, well, anyway, I didn't get reclassified as a conscientious objector.
So you graduate high school, so it was like 1976. Yeah, and so what happened after you graduated high school then? What?
I went to college. I went to University of Bridgeport. Was one of the only schools that would take me because of my poor grades. And so University of Bridgeport was kind of a place for people who had fairly well-off parents, but their kids had bad grades. And I majored in economics there. And then the first semester was great because we studied all the various Marx and David Ricardo and all kind of the original thinkers in the discipline that made the discipline of economics. And so I got so excited that I started to take sophomore classes in my second semester, sophomore economics. And that's where I got into the Samuelson, here's the economics that we've adopted. And the economics that we adopted, turned out was not based on science at all, but was based on these theories of man as Homo economicus, basically human robots that, we basically were selfish. And, so all economics was built on this foundation of human beings as selfish people. And, that really didn't comport with my reality. One thing is my parents were, they both came from Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan was a socialist province when they were growing up. So they had no fault auto insurance, they had health insurance, they had lots of co-ops. I remember going back there to visit gas station co-ops, hardware co-ops, grocery store co-ops. I mean, the communities were fairly small. So if you wanted to, wouldn't be able to attract large commercial stores, or at least originally. So people banded together and formed cooperatives. They had their wheat silos and all that stuff was cooperative. And so, that was not based on a selfish economy. That was based on a caring, sharing economy. So anyway, I just got completely disillusioned with school and dropped out. And then of course I got called up by the Selective Service, and then that's when I moved to Canada.
So you were in college for 1 year then? Or?
Yeah, 1 year.
So you moved, 1977, I guess you moved to
67, yeah.
Sorry, yes. So you moved to Canada. And what did you end up doing in Canada? How long did you live there?
I was only there for probably even less than a year. I started as a bank manager trainee. Basically, I wanted to be an economist still. I thought maybe there's some better place than the school I went to. And so I thought, okay, if I worked for the World Bank or something, maybe I could make the world better from there. So I went to work for the Bank of Nova Scotia. And one thing that, really struck me there was I took a class to be a bank manager, and it was taught by a woman. but there was no women in the class. And I asked the teacher, well, why are there no women in the class? And she says, well, because people won't put their money in a bank that's run by a woman. So, the world was a different place back then, and it included Canada, not just the United States. So I applied to Simon Fraser University out in Vancouver. And I remember I called them up and said, hey, I haven't been notified that I've been accepted. And woman on the phone said, oh, everyone who's been rejected has been sent letters. So you must have been accepted. So like an idiot, I drove out to Vancouver, and turned out I wasn't accepted. So, but it turned out that the school had been taken over by Americans. I was going to be a political science, sociology, and anthropology and economics major. They had kind of a weird combination. And but that department was taken over by Americans. So anyway, they changed the curriculum around. I wouldn't have liked it anyway. So then I came back to the States and went to Rutgers for a while. And then ended up at Southern Connecticut after a couple more. I ended up at Southern Connecticut State College because it was $50 a semester. So,
I want to go back for a second. Did you have any problems? I mean, going to Canada, did you just drive over the border? What?
Yeah, no, I had no problems because I had Canadian citizenship because my parents were Canadian. So I basically just appeared at the border. I think maybe I had to mail something, or my parents had to mail something to the consulate or something. Anyway, by the time I got to the border, I had a little piece of paper that said, oh, they basically just, okay. So I got my social insurance card and all that. And actually, when I went to work for the bank, I went in thinking, okay, I want them to accept me as I am, not as whatever. So I went in blue jeans, and the person at the bank manager interviewed me and said, well, if you work here, you're going to have to dress up in a suit. And he asked me why I was in Canada when I had grown up in the States. I said, well, I opposed the war. And he said, well, that's good. And he basically told me that if you need a loan for a suit, we'll give you a loan. So I thought, okay, well, I mean, I had a suit, so I didn't need a loan. But.
And then what year did you come back to the States?
Just the next year. I think I went to Rutgers in '68, and then back to University of Bridgeport, and then to Southern Connecticut State College. So.
And no issues with you coming back then? You didn't have to.
Well, yeah, there was an issue. I basically came back to the States thinking, I had friends who had gone to jail and whatever, and I didn't want to do that originally. And plus I was Canadian, but living in Canada, I mean, even though you'd think it's just like the United States, it didn't quite feel at home to me. It felt like another country. So I didn't, especially after I got rejected from Simon Fraser, I just thought, okay, I'll back to the United States. If I have to go to jail, I'll go to jail. And, but then it turned out we got the numbers. So fortunately, I pulled a high number in the lottery. And so I didn't have to go.
And were you involved in anti-war protests when you came back?
Yeah, to some extent. I was not, our campus was not Kent State or anything, but we did have protests around campus. I think we did, University of Bridgeport, I think we took over, we did have a sit-in and took over some buildings and whatever for a while.
So you went to Southern Connecticut, and then you graduated, and then what happened after that?
Then I graduated with a degree in education because that was the quickest degree to get, and sociology. I switched to sociology because that was a real science. So, and instead of instead of studying people as they should be, sociology actually studies people as they are. So I then got accepted to University of Idaho for graduate school. But then I went out to University of Idaho, and I guess I had seen pictures of the campus and it looked really nice. But when I got there, it was like, this place is out in the middle of nowhere. And I just felt like I cannot, it was just too much country for me because I had been around New York for quite a bit. I would go into the city for events and whatever. So then I went to Eugene to try to go to University of Oregon, and but I was too late. So then I went down to Southern Oregon. I think it's Southern Oregon University now. I went there for maybe a year of what I call remedial graduate school. Majored in planning, so land use planning. So I thought, oh, it might be good to be a planner. But then there was nothing to, there was no way to make a living in Ashland, Oregon. So a friend of mine who was making educational films and film strips and whatever invited me down to Sacramento. So I came down and became a producer of film strips and educational program learning education. So it was good that I had the education background, but that didn't pay very well. I ended up working for the state of California and worked first as well, basically as an analyst doing all kinds of different things. But then I eventually I worked on got a master's in public administration from Cal State Sacramento. And that's where I started learning about workplace democracy. I got Paul Bernstein's book. I got very much into Peter Berger's The Social Construction of Reality and Sociology of Knowledge. And I wrote my thesis on worker control in the public sector. But it took me a year to get someone to read the thesis because nobody knew anything about what I was writing about until they had a guest professor from the UK. And so he finally became about a year later, he became my thesis advisor. And so I was finally able to graduate.
So you graduated, you're still working for the state of California.
Yeah.
You're living in Sacramento. And then you find out about this program at Boston College. And how did that sound to you? I mean, why did you decide to do that?
Ooh, boy, that was like heaven. I mean, I had read something of Sev Bruin, who started the program. I forget exactly what it was I read, but then as soon as I saw, I'm not even sure how I found out about the program. But as soon as I saw who was associated with the program, so Sev, and then I read more of his work, and of course I had known Paul Bernstein's work. And then I found out that Peter Berger was going to be there, and I thought, wow, I mean, I got the 3 Bs of gods to me. So I thought, and then I got this fellowship, so I got paid to go to school. So just had to do it.
So that's where we met. We met in 1979. We were roommates for a year. You taught me how to stir fry, which is probably one of my better skills in life. That and typing, no doubt about it. And you stayed, how long did you actually stay at Boston College?
I guess 2 years. I'm not quite sure. I was there for the 2 semesters, then I went back to my job in Sacramento, and then I think I came back the next semester. And but then before the spring semester, then I went out to Rath Meatpacking because maybe it was before the next semester. I'm not sure. Somewhere in there. I don't know if it was a year and a half, something like that. But I mean, we had lost lots, Jim Galise, our other roommate, he left, went to Nicaragua. Lots of people left. I mean, it was a group of people who were activists. And so I guess, I wanted to get a doctorate. It would have been great, But on the other hand, it was the nation's largest employee-owned company, and I was interested in finding out, what they were doing and how they were doing it. I knew the people from Cornell who were there, working with them, helping the plant convert from, and it was a tough one because these workers, they thought they owned the plant, so they wanted to take the tools home at night, and the average age at that plant was like age 55 or something, because they laid off in seniority. And then I would go through the plant and point out all kinds of inefficiencies, but a lot of the inefficiencies were things that they had won through their union organization, kind of feather bedding activities that kept more people employed. But, we were trying to convince them that, you don't want feather bedding activities when you own the company. You want to be as lean and profitable as you can. So anyway, they had a lot to learn.
So how long were you actually there for, and what did they in reality do?
Well, they made wieners and, hams and whatever. So, it was a gruesome place to be because, they killed animals. Animals don't like being killed.
In terms of workplace democracy, what?
Workplace, yeah. So Kate Squire, who was girlfriend at that point, she was kind of on the team, basically teaching these people how to analyze their workplace. So they would sit down and figure out, okay, we've got a problem on the wiener line. Where is that originating? And then they would trace everything back. So basically, she was teaching them, production engineering and whatever, or they were learning it together. And they did vastly increase the efficiency of the plant. But my things were more accounting and whatever. Anyway, I got thrown out of the plant after a while because they just said that, these are, like I told them, you want a cafeteria benefit style plan because then you can defer, you don't have to pay tax, the workers don't have to pay taxes on anything that comes through their benefit plan. So you can give them gym memberships, they can pick from a bunch of different things. And well, no, they didn't like that because that felt like paternalism. They wanted people to just get paid in money. And, I was trying to bring back canned ham or whatever, So anyway.
Are they still in business? Do you know? Are they still?
No, they were out of business probably, another 6 months after I left.
Hmm.
So, and actually Kate got a job. I helped her get a job with the California, I forget what it's called, but basically there was a job created at the Department of Commerce, I guess, to look at plant closures. And I helped her get this job so got a bill through the legislature so that when a plant closed in California, they had to do an assessment of whether or not the workers could buy the plant out and run it themselves. So she was kind of in charge of that program. And there was another job heading the Cooperative Development Program, and that's what I headed when I got back. So I worked mostly with consumer co-ops, and cooperatives like credit unions, food co-ops, production co-ops.
So this is really part of your entire being, given your parents' background,
Yeah.
co-ops, worker ownership, workplace democracy. I mean, what successes have you seen, and what's kind of, are you aware of what's going on now with the whole movement?
Well, I guess I only did that job for a year because, well, basically because they did away with the program. You know, it was a program started by Jerry Brown, and when the Republicans came in, they didn't see the need for co-ops, helping co-ops out, but also the Berkeley Co-op, the large consumer cooperatives in the state, they went bankrupt, basically. And they went bankrupt for lots and lots of reasons, but among the reasons were that, you know, they paid the highest wages, they were all unionized, and they were competing against Walmart was starting to come in. And so, and they were reluctant to, you know, cut back people's wages and that sort of thing. So that job ended. And then I could also see that, you know, even when Paul Bernstein studied the worker plywood co-ops, since they didn't have the infrastructure in place that, say, Mondragon had in Spain, where they had a bank and they had university and they had all these things supporting the businesses. And so when an employee wanted to retire, they could sell back to the company and the bank could help the company. Plywood co-ops didn't have any of that, basically. So after a while, when the plywood co-ops, when you could make $1 million by selling the plywood co-op, when all the employees could make a fortune, they did, you know, and they just sold out. So, and then I helped form in Sacramento, there was a cab co-op, and I advised them, okay, well, make sure that you get someone who really knows what they're doing in the office to take care of the accounting and all that, and make sure. Anyway, they basically assigned that to the guy that helped put the cab co-op together. He was a cab driver, and that was his basic experience, was a cab driver. So, and it turned out that he absconded with a lot of the money. So there was, you know, I wrote these bylaws for them, but that didn't help, you know, when you got someone who wants to create or do illegal things. So I became a little bit disillusioned with cooperatives unless they, you know, what we need is an infrastructure for cooperatives, but also I do think that there's an entrepreneurial spirit that capitalism has that it's hard to match with cooperatives. I mean, you know, you and I, we might be gung-ho cooperatives and we're in it because this is the right thing. This is going to make the world a better place. You know, we are ideologically committed to this. There's a lot of people that just, you know, they might be ideologically favorably disposed to that sort of thing, but they also want to make a lot of money. So, you know, so then towards the end of that stint, I tried looking at kind of hybrids. You know, can we do something with co-ops? Can we hybridize a cooperative with a corporation, with a regular corporation? And even late, like maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I had a proposal. I file a lot of shareholder proposals now. So I filed a proposal at Twitter to have them study, could we turn Twitter into a cooperative? I mean, I had no illusions that Twitter would become a cooperative, but if they studied what cooperatives do and the advantages of cooperatives, then at least maybe they would have a user group, you know, made up of Twitter users and hold conferences and try to get input from their users on, like that was one of the things that really helped Apple initially on, is they had all these user groups, Mac user groups all over the country. And those user groups gave feedback to the company. And so it was kind of like getting paid consulting by their user groups. Anyway, so that, but I've got, I'm still working on that, and I'll have, now there's been several proposals in the last couple of years to put, say, workers on the board of Amazon or, other places. I mean, they don't garner much support, but when you've got Elizabeth Warren introducing bills that, would mandate 40% of boards be made up of employees, I'm hoping that companies will be more receptive to, my latest thing will be companies will set up a works council kind of. So they would have employees elected to form a workers council that would consult with the board. So that's kind of an initial step, which would also set up a framework. Because I think if you have workers elected to the board directly without some sort of framework behind it, like Corey Rosen at the National Center for Employee Ownership, and I remember he came to our Boston College program. So he set up that program, and he snuck in, I don't know if you'd call it sneaking, but he got in bailout legislation. I don't know if it was for United Airlines or United Airlines, maybe GM, a couple of companies where they got a worker on the board, but it was kind of a one-off thing without some sort of infrastructure. And, it worked for a while, and it did, I think it was helpful, but, it really was kind of a one-off. It didn't continue. So I'm looking at something where we set up a structure first, companies start to get used to it, and they can see that, hey, this is a good thing, because as all the evidence shows, the academic evidence and the research shows that if you have some employee ownership and employee participation in decision-making, then your company is more productive. So who doesn't want that?
So you're really continuing to work on somewhat worker ownership, but from a kind of different angle. I mean, corporate governance.
Yeah. I mean, that it hasn't been, most of my proposals are not that creative because the world wasn't ready yet for that, I guess. But now I can see that, okay, we've got a chance. That can happen. So
let's talk a little bit about Myra. When did you meet her?
Oh, I met her when I came back to California after I had gone to Waterloo, Iowa for the Rath meat packing. And I lived in a group house, and it was mostly ballet dancers. So we tried to have a mix of men and women in the house. And I said, okay, well, there was nothing wrong with being a ballet dancer, but they didn't have a lot of time to study. I can remember talking to one who thought Tom Hayden and Ronald Reagan, hey, they're both politicians and they're cool people and whatever. But, there was a difference between their politics. And so, and that's because, the ballet dancers, they had to work full time, and then they had to practice ballet for 3 hours a day. So they didn't have a lot of time to read, lots of books. So I said, okay, well, the next woman that we get in the house, they're going to have to be a community activist. They're going to have to, I laid out all these things, and it turned out, okay, Myra, she's the one who somehow she found us, and then I fell in love.
So how long have you been together?
A long time. I don't know. She would know the answer to that. Probably 33 years, something like that. I don't know. Quite a while.
Long time.
Yeah.
And is she still working then too?
No. She's retired too. She's been retired for a while.
Yeah.
She was in education. She did adult. She basically down in your area. in Southern California. She was in charge of adult schools for the state of California. She would go down there and make sure that they had, proper curriculum and that the schools were set up right so that the state would reimburse them for their costs. Basically, she went down and kind of, not like an auditor with finance, more of an auditor for program to see if they were conducting the program per the requirements. So it's mostly English as a second language, but lots of other classes as well.
So I want to just talk a minute about, this time in the world in the United States is, pretty crazy. You lived through the 60s too. Are there any comparisons that you see at all?
Well, yeah, sure. There was certainly the civil rights movement. That happened when I was, my brother's, lots of his friends went down south during, when SNCC got developed and Medgar Evers got killed and lots of other people, lots of bad things happened. I was a little young at that beginning of it. But the civil rights movement, that was my introduction to it. My father was very active in the civil rights movement. And he was behind trying to get that house sold to Cassius Clay. And we were trying to, because our community was redlined and they wouldn't sell to anyone other than white Protestants, basically. And there was, and of course I made huge progress. I mean, tremendous progress as far as voters' rights. And I think there was kind of a backsliding, when, I forget when it was, but fairly not too long ago, where they let the law expire that required, okay, if you're going to change the law in these historically discriminatory areas of states, that you had to get them approved by, Department of Justice, or, I'm not really that familiar with the law, but basically once that part of the law was let go, then we have all these things that are basically putting up roadblocks. They're not quite as blatant as they used to be, where, if you're a black person, you come to register, they ask you how many jelly beans are in the jar, or they give you a history quiz, and, that no white person in the community would be able to pass either. And then you flunk. So it's just a way to keep black people from registering to vote. Well, now they're, you've got to have your license, your driver's license. I don't know all the things that they're doing, but they're doing a lot of things. Stacey Abrams has this whole group now trying to get people to be able to register reasonably, and all over the country. And of course, gerrymandering is another way that has been used to keep one party in power versus, it's Republicans, let's just say it as it was. But when I was a kid, Republicans were not as bad as, I remember Richard Nixon, would come into our neighborhood because he, anyway, we were Republican. He was vice president then. So I remember playing kickball with him on the street. So he wanted to join us and, whatever, earn some credits with the parents or whatever. So, and, Nixon wasn't all that radical back when he was vice president. And there was people like Lowell Weicker in Connecticut. There was all kinds of liberal Republicans. And so, but things have really sharply divided now. So, and especially now with Trump, you had Romney was the only one standing up in the Senate to say they should be able to provide evidence. People should be able to testify in the hearings, on impeachment. I mean, that's crazy. When I was a kid, I can't imagine people falling in line with basically a narcissistic, whatever the hell he is. I mean, he's basically a child in an adult's body. Anyway.
What are you looking forward to over the next 10, 20 years of your life?
Well, I'm looking forward to making corporations more democratic. I think, we're finally, I've got a good friend, Bob Monks, who taught me a lot. And the last, 10 years, he's been very frustrated. Well, he's maybe 15 years older than I am. So he can see that it's not going to happen in his lifetime. And so he's just, he used to try to get the board of directors at ExxonMobil divided, So, and he did that. He's ran the same resolution for 10 years or whatever. And he paid a fortune because he's a rich guy and I do everything myself. So it doesn't cost me anything, but he paid $50,000 to have this proposal filed and to, go through all the rigmarole, pay all the attorneys and whatever. So he's very frustrated, but I think we're on the cusp now of transformation. And so I'm working on, and like just this morning, I read that British Petroleum is now writing off billions of dollars worth of their oil as stranded assets. So, here's a petroleum company coming to realize, what's on the horizon. And okay, the world is going to change. We can't depend on oil as an asset forever. So but I've got some irons in the fire. One of the irons is basically, Bob, one of the things that he finally got was he got it so that mutual funds had to disclose how they voted their proxies. So in mutual funds, there's trillions of dollars in mutual funds. People have 401ks, even a lot of pension plans, they invest through mutual funds. So one of the things that Bob got when he was, well, anyway, too long of a story, but basically he got through Congress legislation that required, so once a year, mutual funds have to disclose how they vote to the SEC, but they disclose them basically in HTML code. So it's all in code. People can't read it. Basically, if you go to like BlackRock BlackRock has now fixed something a little bit, but if you go to Vanguard, lots of other funds, and try to see how they voted on different issues like, Me Too kind of stuff, or Black Lives Matter, all kinds of social issues, governance issues, environmental issues, you won't be able to figure it out. But if you subscribe to Proxy Insight, which costs $10,000 a year, then you can get a grid and you can see how each fund voted on each issue at each company. And then you'd be able to tell, this fund has a horrible, so the big funds like Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, those are the funds, those three funds together own 25% of all the major companies in the country. And they vote against everything that you and I would stand for with regard to the environment, social. Although BlackRock, Larry Fink, comes out every year and says how good, it is to be environmental and all that, but they're still voting bad. So Bob got this rule through. I did petition to the SEC to make it so that whenever they vote, they have to announce that vote right away, and they have to put it in a database format that anyone can go and see, so that anyone can understand how their fund is voting. Because I think once people understand how these funds are voting, they will demand that the funds change. They don't know that the funds are voting this way, and they say they're voting that way because, well, basically, fiduciary duty has been reinterpreted, you know, by bad people about 10 or 15 years ago, 20 years ago, as making as much money as possible and be damned about, you know, what impact it may have on the environment or anything else. So, you know, a lot of fund fiduciaries think that they are locked into just trying to make as much money as possible. But even that is stupid, because you make more money by being environment, like Walmart has found out that if they put solar panels on all their buildings, they, you know, not only help the environment, but they help Walmart because it's a lot cheaper. So that's one thing, is I've got this, that's one iron in the fire. Another iron in the fire is so another problem with corporations is limited liability. And so because of limited, you know, when you buy a share in a company, the only thing that you're liable for is that share. You spend $100, they can't come to you and take any money out of your bank account. You could lose that $100, but that's it. And I think, you know, originally when corporations first started, and, you know, is India East India Company or whatever, they basically had to convince people to spend money to invest in a company that was very risky. And the only way they could do that is to limit their liability and to give them a monopoly. So they got a monopoly to exploit India, and you know, they wouldn't lose anything more than what they invested. Well, over the course of time, that changed. So you no longer had to get a charter from the king. Charters were automatically given if you applied, and kind of like you know, it was the lowest common denominator when Delaware became the corporate headquarters for a lot of, or at least the filing place. So anyway, this idea is that when you buy a share, you would have to pay a tax of like 0.2% of what the share costs. And that money would be held and would go into a fund. And if the company goes bankrupt, or maybe even if it gets huge fines, whatever, anyway, they would tap that fund. But if they don't, then you'd get that money back in 5 or 10 years. So it's a way of bringing back some sort of thought that if we're irresponsible owners, we're going to lose this money that we tucked away. So maybe this will incentivize us. And, you know, maybe those, I mean, the numbers can all be jiggered, and we have to figure out how long to keep and how much to tax and all that. But that's the basic idea, is to make it so that these funds, they can only get the money back if their companies aren't, the idea is basically don't allow them to push their costs onto society and onto the environment, to somehow factor that in. And then another thing is the employee ownership. So I'll be filing proposals on that. And then I also want to see more Americans owning stock. So back after World War II, there was this whole drive by the New York Stock Exchange to get people to own stock. It's called Own Your Shares. So own your share of the United States. Well, why did the New York Stock Exchange do that? One reason is they wanted to generate commissions, brokerage commissions. And they also were afraid of communism right after World War II. So they wanted everybody to feel like they're capitalists. So they have part of the system. But there was, back then when they started this Own Your Share of America, no one ever talked about, well, as a share owner, you get a say in what the company does. You could devote your share. And if you are a responsible shareholder, then you know, you can be up on the issues. And we got to create much easier way for people to be up on the issues. And I'm working on some of that stuff too. But you know, basically, if you look even in kind of maybe the best of all worlds, we certainly need to raise the minimum wage. We need to tax the rich like crazy. I mean, in Denmark, the lowest 10% and the highest 10%, there's a 5 times income gap between those two. So if you're in the bottom 10%, you earn a fifth of the people in the top 10%. I don't know what it is here, maybe 300 or something, but it's huge compared to Denmark. I mean, because people in Denmark, they care about each other. They have health insurance, they have education, they have child care, they have parental leave, they have all kinds of stuff, and this country is basically just, hey, you're on your own, buddy, So, and I just think that hopefully people are waking up, with this. I think the virus, the pandemic, people are kind of seeing that, okay, we're spending trillions of dollars. And, we did start something of a welfare, okay, we're paying people to stay home, and some people are earning more than they would earn if they were working. And so we're seeing that there can be social advantages to programs like that. And then, of course, this Black Lives Matter thing and people waking up to the fact that, I mean, and I don't know what the statistics are, but I think the average Black family, their assets are 1/10 of the average family in America. So 1/10. I mean, there are historical impacts from racism, and we need to address that unless we want to continue to have warring in the streets and people shooting people because they, I mean, the one guy recently was, he was asleep in his car and they woke him up and then they shot him. I mean, basically, and they shot him while he was running away. And then the guy that passed the counterfeit money, he may not have known he passed counterfeit money, basically, and just to, I mean, that going back to Pittsburgh, when I grew up in that wealthy community, that was another eye-opener for me, because just one little story here, just to wrap it up, I guess. But, when I was in junior high, I guess, I had developed, so I was in junior high, and I used to go downtown Pittsburgh, and my friends' fathers had phones that had televisions on them. So we could go over to Westinghouse and we could call US Steel. And this was back in the early 60s. We had video phones, basically. I mean, they had video phones. Anyway, I had developed this because I was poor. At least I thought I was poor, because my father was only a professor and these guys were rich because they earned 30 times back then. CEOs and whatever earned 30 times what the average person owned. Now it's 340 times or whatever. But I could tell that my friends' fathers, they had no conception of how regular people lived. But because I was, I wanted to fit in with my friends. I wanted to they had expensive clothing, and I didn't shop at Brooks Brothers and all those places. And even shirts from like the department stores like Macy's, where they cost too much money. But I had developed a method to steal from these stores. It was basically a fail-safe method, because back then they didn't have security cameras and all that kind of stuff. And so I would routinely go down there, I would steal clothes from the department stores in this kind of foolproof manner. And then one day I just got fed up. I had this whole routine I had to go through to steal the clothes. And I thought, these guys are so stupid. I should just steal the clothes, and put them in my bag and walk out. Well, they did have cameras watching the clothes, but not in the dressing rooms. Anyway, so I got caught, and they had security cameras that told them who I came in the store with. So the guy I came in the store with, his father was head of the FBI, in Allegheny County. And so, and he didn't know what I was doing, you know. So I got taken in to the security place at Macy's or wherever it was. And then John got taken in too, and they asked us, well, you know, who are your parents and where do they work, and because they're going to call. So, and Dad and John said, well, my father's head of the FBI. You guys better release me right now, or else you're going to be in big trouble. and you know, they said, oh yeah, and I'm J. Edgar Hoover or whatever. You know, and then they went away and they came back. His father is head of the FBI. You know? And so, and then they asked me, well, you know, what does your father do? And I said, well, my father works at Mellon Institute. He's a research. So anyway, they just basically said, okay, get out of here. Don't do this again. But they did call my father and, you know, talk to him for a little bit. But at that point, I began to realize that, you know, okay, if I was a kid from the poor side of the tracks in Pittsburgh, they would not just let me off. I mean, another incident that happened, I was road racing around my neighborhood one night. We would go out on Saturday night and, you know, I'd be going 70 miles an hour, speeding all around town. And I got stopped by the police and they asked, you know, and I thought, oh God, they're gonna take my driver's license away. No, they said, who threw that cup out of the window? You know, it's basically a way for the police to tell you, hey, we've been following you. We know what you did, but we know you're rich brats. You know, we're not going to punish you. So take it easy, you know. And anyway, a couple of things like that. And I, you know, realized that the world is not a very just place. And, you know, and I should not be taking advantage of growing up in a neighborhood like that. I should be working for change so that everyone gets a second chance. Everyone gets a third chance. You know, that, you know, these people that I grew up with, they were no more deserving. They didn't work any harder. I mean, basically in my career, I found out that the higher up I got, the less boring work I had to do. You know, my employees did all the difficult work and I got to do the schmoozing and the big heavy thinking and whatever. And so, but, you know, if you cut yourself off from those employees and just order them around, then you don't really know how the system operates. You know, so you have to have a participatory work environment in order to know what's going on. And you know, I tried to create that in my workplace, and I want a more participatory world. I want a world where companies are owned by the workers and we all have some say, and our values are reflected in those companies. And those companies have to be purpose driven, and they're not run by dictators like Mark Zuckerberg or you know, people that run Google or whatever. You know, that I mean, he's been a fairly benign dictator, I guess, in his own mind. But you know, if he wasn't there, probably Trump wouldn't have got elected. So you know, it can't be all that benign.
Well, Jim, this has been just a wonderful interview. And I just hope that, you know, you keep going for many more years and help to make the world a better place. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's been great talking to you, and let's keep in touch.
Okay.